It was a busy afternoon in downtown Los Angeles. People were rushing everywhere, cars honking, street vendors shouting, tourists snapping photos, and locals weaving through the crowded sidewalks. Among all this chaos, one woman was standing near a cafe waiting for her order. She was checking her phone, completely unaware of the storm about to hit her. Suddenly, a man walking by shoved her hard, right in front of everyone. He laughed cruelly, thinking it was just another random act that no one would care about. "Watch where you're standing, lady," he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. The crowd gasped and murmured, but nobody stepped in. Everyone was frozen, unsure what to do. A few people glanced at each other nervously. Some pulled out their phones, recording. Others just turned away, pretending not to notice. The woman stumbled but caught herself. Her face flushed with embarrassment and shock. Her eyes searched for anyone who could stop this man. But there was no one. Just strangers passing by, some laughing quietly, some pretending nothing happened. Felt like time slowed down. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Then, at the edge of the crowd, leaning against a building, a man watched everything unfold. He wasn't moving. He didn't shout. He didn't rush forward. He simply stood there, calm and composed, his hands in his pockets, hood over his head, sunglasses hiding his eyes. At first, no one noticed him, just another passerby in a hoodie. But there was something in the way he held himself that made the air around him feel heavier, more focused. Seconds passed. The aggressor, thinking the woman would just walk away, turned and laughed again, clearly proud of himself. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, glancing at the crowd, expecting admiration for his so-called courage. But suddenly the laughing stopped. The quiet man finally stepped forward. Not aggressively, not angrily, just forward in a way that made the crowd instinctively step back. Every eye in the area slowly turned to him. There was a calm authority in his movements, a silent warning that something serious was about to happen. People could feel it even before they saw who it was. And then a whisper ran through the crowd. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" The street went silent. The man who thought he could humiliate someone in public had no idea who he was messing with. And in that split second, everything changed. The woman's heart pounded. The crowd held its breath. And the aggressor realized, too late, that he had just crossed the wrong person. What happened next? It's something that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. The afternoon air in downtown Los Angeles was buzzing with activity, filled with the smell of coffee from nearby cafes, exhaust fumes from the endless stream of cars, and the chatter of tourists snapping selfies. On this particular block, the city's pulse felt faster than usual, a mix of hurried locals, street performers drawing small crowds, and the occasional police siren wailing somewhere in the distance. Amid all this chaos, the woman who had just been shoved stood frozen for a moment, gripping her phone tightly. Her face was flushed, a mix of shock, embarrassment, and anger. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, while the aggressor, a man in his late 30s with a smug expression and a leather jacket, sauntered past her as if nothing had happened. He glanced around at the crowd, laughing quietly to himself, enjoying the power he thought he held. "Everyone's too scared to do anything," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head with self-satisfaction. The woman looked around desperately. The people nearby either avoided eye contact or whispered among themselves. A young man recording on his phone stopped, frozen, unsure if he should intervene. A street vendor shook his head and went back to packing sandwiches. It was as if the world had collectively agreed to look the other way. That's when she felt a hand on her shoulder, not to calm her, but to gently stop her from rushing forward. At the edge of the crowd, leaning against the side of a building, was a man in simple clothes, jeans, a dark hoodie, and sneakers. His face was partially hidden under sunglasses, and his posture exuded a calm, unshakable presence. He wasn't trying to draw attention, yet the energy around him felt heavier, charged, like the calm before a storm. People didn't notice him at first, just another pedestrian passing by, but there was something about the way he observed the situation that made it clear he wasn't ordinary. The woman's husband, unbeknownst to the aggressor, was standing a few feet away, seemingly casual but keeping his eyes fixed on the man who had hit his wife. He didn't make a move yet, didn't shout, didn't push anyone, he just watched. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, the kind that could make even the bravest person reconsider their actions. The crowd, still unaware of the tension, continued to murmur and record, oblivious to what was about to unfold. The aggressor, noticing the woman hadn't run or called for help, smirked. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he sneered, glancing around expecting anyone, to back him up or intervene. But there was nothing. No one came. Only the quiet man leaning against the wall, whose calm presence seemed to shrink the space around him, as if gravity itself had changed in that corner of the street. Suddenly, the man in the hoodie stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, his movements measured yet confident. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply approached, and with each step, the crowd instinctively gave him space. Whispers spread, "Who is that? Wait, do you recognize him?" And then someone gasped aloud, "No, it can't be, is that Keanu Reeves?" The moment the name was spoken, the aggressor's smirk faltered. His eyes darted nervously toward the man approaching him. The once confident crowd started to lean in, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. The woman's hand instinctively moved toward her husband, who remained eerily calm, a silent guardian in plain sight. Time seemed to slow. The cars, the chatter, the honking, all of it faded into a tense silence. Every person in the immediate area held their breath, some instinctively raising their phones, knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. And for the aggressor, realization hit like a punch. He had no idea who he had just provoked, and that ignorance might cost him his dignity, or worse. In that instant, it wasn't just about a shove or a street fight. It was about accountability, presence, and a quiet power that needed no words to command respect. The stage was set, the actors in position, and the story was about to take a turn no one would forget. The crowd held its breath as the quiet man in the hoodie stepped closer, his every movement calm, deliberate, and measured. The aggressor, who had moments ago been laughing and sneering, suddenly felt an unshakable weight press down on him. It was the kind of presence that didn't shout, didn't threaten, it simply existed and it demanded attention. Every whisper, every shuffle of feet, every hesitant camera flash seemed to amplify the tension in the air. "Hey, what's the big idea?" the man in the leather jacket said, trying to regain his swagger. His voice trembled slightly, though he didn't notice. He still thought he could intimidate the woman, the crowd, or even this stranger. But now, every instinct screamed that he had miscalculated. The quiet man stopped just a few feet away, hands in pockets, hood over his head, sunglasses reflecting the sunlight. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence itself was louder than any shouting, and it carried a weight that the aggressor could feel deep in his bones. "You think this is funny?" the aggressor stammered. He looked around, hoping someone in the crowd would back him up. But all he saw were faces frozen in awe, some phones raised, some mouths open, some hands gripping their chests as if trying to contain shock. The woman's eyes were wide, a mixture of fear and awe. She didn't need to speak. Her husband, calm, quiet, poised, stood behind her, every muscle relaxed yet ready, his gaze locked on the aggressor. For the first time, the man in the leather jacket noticed the quiet man wasn't ordinary. There was an energy emanating from him, not anger, not threat, but absolute control. Every step he took seemed measured, intentional. Every inch he closed between them tightened the atmosphere. "Do you even know who you're messing with?" someone in the crowd whispered. Others turned, craning their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the man who had stepped forward. And then a gasp ran through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. The aggressor's confident smirk faded, replaced with confusion, fear, and disbelief. He scanned the crowd. "Wait, what?" His voice cracked. You're Keanu Reeves?" The crowd erupted in whispers and murmurs. Phones captured the moment. The man in the leather jacket, who had once thought himself untouchable, now felt his confidence crumble. Every laugh, every sneer, every act of arrogance came crashing down in that instant. He realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had humiliated a woman in public, yes, but now he faced someone whose calm presence alone could undo every shred of his bravado. Keanu Reeves didn't raise his voice. He didn't lunge. He simply looked at the aggressor, a faint, almost imperceptible smile forming on his lips. There was no rage, no anger, only the quiet, undeniable authority of someone who could command respect without a single shout. "You should think before you act," Keanu said softly. His voice didn't carry threats, it carried truth. The kind that hits harder than any punch because it forces a person to face themselves. The aggressor's face turned pale. Sweat dripped down his temples. His legs felt weak, his jaw tight. He had made the classic mistake of underestimating someone, and not just anyone. Keanu Reeves. The man whose calm presence had changed the dynamic of the entire street within seconds. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing that the confrontation had reached its peak. Some recorded in silence, others whispered nervously, and a few simply stared, captivated. The lesson was clear: arrogance and cruelty have consequences, and sometimes those consequences appear in the calmest, most unassuming forms. The tension was unbearable. Every eye was fixed on the pair, the aggressor now stripped of confidence, and the man who didn't need power to command it. Every heartbeat in the crowd synced with the moment, waiting for the inevitable, the moment when humiliation would meet quiet justice. And in that moment, the street seemed to hold its breath. The world shrank down to two men, one woman, and the invisible line of respect that had just been crossed. A line that would never be forgotten. The air on the street had changed. The chaos of the city, the honking cars, the shouting vendors, the laughter of passers-by, seemed to fade into the background. Every eye was on the man in the leather jacket and the quiet figure approaching him. The crowd's murmurs grew into whispers, and whispers became a tense silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of feet as people instinctively stepped back. The aggressor's confidence, which had seemed unshakable only moments ago, had crumbled completely. His smirk was gone, replaced with a blank stare, a trembling jaw, and eyes darting nervously between the crowd and the man approaching him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, as if he suddenly realized the full weight of what he had done. "Wait, are you Keanu Reeves?" he stammered, voice cracking like a child caught in a lie. His bravado had evaporated, leaving only panic and disbelief. The crowd reacted instantly. Phones were raised, some recording, some live-streaming. Gasps echoed across the street. Pedestrians paused mid-step, frozen in awe. Even those who hadn't noticed the initial incident now stopped, pulled in by the tension radiating from the scene. Some whispered among themselves, barely able to believe what they were seeing. The woman, still clutching her phone, felt a mixture of relief and amazement. Her husband, who had remained quiet and observant until now, gave a subtle nod to her, signaling that she didn't need to worry. He stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp, like a hawk watching every subtle movement of the aggressor. The quiet man, Keanu Reeves, took another step forward. His hands remained in his pockets. His gaze never wavered. He didn't shout. He didn't make a threatening gesture. And yet, the aggressor felt every ounce of authority emanating from him like a physical force pressing down on his shoulders. The street felt smaller, more confined. Every person present could feel the shift. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. Pedestrians who had initially ignored the scene now edged closer, craning their necks to catch every detail. A few street performers paused mid-act. Even the vendors stopped shouting, their eyes drawn to the scene like magnets. "Think before you act," Keanu said quietly, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the aggressor flinch. He didn't need to shout. The truth in those words hit harder than any yell could have. The man in the leather jacket staggered back slightly, his mind racing, realizing he had publicly humiliated a woman, and now faced someone who could dismantle him without a single blow. Whispers ran through the crowd again. He didn't even raise his voice. "This is Keanu Reeves. Did you see how calm he is?" People were captivated, some recording every second, some simply frozen, unable to look away. The woman's friends and onlookers began murmuring, comparing the scene to something out of a movie, not realizing it was happening right in front of them. The aggressor tried to speak, to apologize, but words failed him. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again like a fish out of water. Sweat dripped down his temples. His hands shook. His bravado had disappeared completely, replaced with raw, unfiltered fear. Every person watching could feel it. He had underestimated the wrong man. Keanu Reeves took one final step closer, close enough that the aggressor could feel the intensity of his presence. The woman instinctively moved behind her husband but didn't panic. She could feel the power in the quiet man's composure, the kind of calm that doesn't need action to enforce authority. A collective gasp went through the crowd as someone whispered again, louder this time, "He's not going to do anything. He doesn't need to." It was true. The aggressor realized it too. He had no control here. Not with this man. Not with the crowd watching. And most importantly, not over the lesson he had just learned. Respect cannot be forced and arrogance has consequences. The silence stretched on, heavy and electric. The aggressor's knees buckled slightly. He knew in that instant that his public humiliation had only just begun, even without Keanu raising a hand or shouting. The lesson had been delivered, and it would echo in his mind long after the street emptied and the cameras were turned off. The crowd, finally exhaling as the tension reached its peak, whispered to each other, eyes wide. Phones recorded every detail, ready to share the story online, a story no one would ever forget. Every single person there understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a quiet, calm presence transforming a chaotic street into a scene of reverent awe. The woman looked up at her husband, then at Keanu, her heart still racing. She realized, in a way she never would have expected, that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who don't need to shout, who don't need to fight. They simply show up, calm and composed, and let the weight of their presence speak for itself. The street was no longer ordinary. The crowd no longer casual. And the aggressor, he was no longer confident. The tension on the street had reached a breaking point. Every eye was fixed on the quiet man who had just stopped the aggressor in his tracks. The crowd's murmur had grown into a stunned silence, punctuated only by shallow breaths and the occasional click of a phone camera. The man in the leather jacket, once brimming with confidence, now stood frozen, his bravado completely shattered. He stared at the quiet figure before him, trying to read a hint of anger, a sign of threat, anything he could use to regain some sense of control. But there was nothing. Only calm. Only an aura of authority so quiet yet so powerful it felt like gravity itself had shifted. Wait a second, the aggressor muttered, his voice shaky, his eyes narrowing. You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you? The whisper spread instantly through the crowd like wildfire. Gasps erupted from all directions. Phones went up, cameras flashed, and even passers-by who hadn't seen the incident initially turned back, drawn in by the growing commotion. Is that Keanu Reeves? Someone whispered behind him. No way, it can't be. The woman, still clutching her phone, barely believed it herself. Her husband's calm hand rested lightly on her shoulder, signaling that she should stay still. He didn't need to say anything, she already knew what this meant. This wasn't just a celebrity casually appearing on the street. This was someone whose presence alone demanded respect, and now the man who had struck her was about to realize that in the most humbling way possible. The crowd leaned in closer, craning their necks. Children paused mid-step, street vendors stopped calling to customers, and even nearby drivers slowed down, drawn into the electric tension. The aggressor's lips quivered as he tried to speak again, but his voice betrayed him. I didn't know. Keanu Reeves didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He didn't even take a threatening step closer. He simply looked at the man, and in that look was the weight of every lesson the aggressor had failed to learn in life. It was a look that said, without words, you have underestimated the wrong person. You have humiliated the wrong woman. And now you will face the consequences of your arrogance. The crowd's whispers grew louder. He's so calm, one person muttered. He doesn't even need to hit him, another added. Phones recorded every second, every subtle movement, knowing this was a moment that would go viral in seconds. People were captivated, unable to look away. It was as if the street itself had transformed into a stage, and everyone had become part of the audience witnessing a real-life lesson in humility. The aggressor's knees buckled slightly. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Sweat dripped down his temples. His jaw tightened. Every instinct in his body screamed that he had crossed a line he couldn't recover from. He tried to apologize again, but the words came out fragmented and weak, like a child caught in a lie. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Keanu's faint smile remained. He spoke softly, with authority that carried louder than any scream could have. You should always think before you act. Respect is not given. It's earned, and sometimes it's tested in ways you least expect. The crowd gasped at his words. The simplicity and weight of them were overwhelming. Some recorded the moment silently, while others whispered in disbelief. Even those who had never cared about celebrity sightings felt the significance of what was unfolding. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't a fan moment. This was a real-life demonstration of quiet power and integrity. The woman's husband stepped forward slightly, still calm, but the aggressor noticed for the first time that he was not just a bystander. His presence alone reinforced the lesson. Arrogance had no place here. The aggressor's eyes widened as he realized the magnitude of the mistake he had made. He had humiliated a woman, underestimated her husband, and now faced a man whose presence alone could command respect, Keanu Reeves. People in the crowd began whispering to each other, speculating about what would happen next. Would Keanu retaliate? Would he make the aggressor pay? But the answer became clear in the calmness of his demeanor. He didn't need to strike. He didn't need to yell. The weight of his presence, his identity, and his calm authority was punishment enough. The aggressor sank to his knees, trembling, unable to meet Keanu's eyes. The woman stepped back slightly, still in shock as the crowd absorbed the lesson in silence. Every person present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment of humility, respect, and quiet justice that would stay with them forever. Keanu nodded once to the woman and her husband, a gesture of reassurance and closure. Then, without another word, he turned and began to walk away, leaving behind a scene that would be replayed, shared, and remembered by everyone who witnessed it. The streets slowly returned to normal, but nothing would ever feel the same. The lesson had been delivered. Arrogance has consequences, respect is earned, and sometimes the quietest, calmest people wield the most powerful force of all. And for the aggressor, that realization would haunt him for the rest of his life. The streets seemed frozen in time, even as the usual rhythm of Los Angeles began to creep back. The cars slowly resumed their honking, street vendors resumed their calls, and pedestrians tentatively stepped back into the flow of the afternoon. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation, the atmosphere had changed forever. The memory of what had just happened lingered in the air, heavy and electric. The man in the leather jacket, who had only moments before been full of arrogance and confidence, now sat on the curb, his knees drawn close to his chest. His chest heaved, and his hands shook as he tried to comprehend what had just occurred. Every nerve in his body screamed humiliation, yet he couldn't bring himself to move. He had underestimated someone in a quiet hoodie, someone who hadn't yelled, hadn't fought back, hadn't even raised a finger, and yet had completely dismantled his arrogance with nothing but presence and authority. He stared after Keanu Reeves as the actor walked away, blending into the crowd, his calm demeanor unchanged. Every step Keanu took was measured, casual, yet filled with a weight that left everyone watching in awe. The aggressor tried to stand, tried to speak, but no words came. He realized the truth. He hadn't just humiliated a woman. He had humiliated himself in front of a legend, a witness to his cruelty and the world around him. The woman, still shaken, stepped closer to her husband. Her hands trembled and her voice barely rose above a whisper. That was, she stammered, unable to finish. Her husband gave her a reassuring look, calm but firm. It's over, he said. He learned his lesson. Let's go home. Yet, for the aggressor, the lesson was only beginning. He could feel it deep in his bones, the weight of his arrogance and cruelty pressing down on him like a physical force. Every glance from the crowd felt like a reminder of his failure. People whispered as they passed him, some shaking their heads, others silently judging, all witnesses to the moment when humility had triumphed over arrogance. A small group of onlookers approached the woman, offering words of comfort and admiration. "Are you okay?" one asked. "He didn't deserve that," said another. She nodded, still in shock, but there was a newfound strength in her posture. The ordeal had reminded her that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm, composed, and completely unassuming, like the man who had just walked away. The aggressor tried to make eye contact with some of the people around him, seeking some form of mercy or understanding, but found none. Every gaze was a silent indictment, a mirror reflecting the arrogance he had carried for far too long. The embarrassment, the fear, the realization of his mistake, all pressed down on him, leaving him shaking and remorseful. Meanwhile, the crowd slowly began to disperse, buzzing with conversation about what they had just witnessed. Phones were raised, stories were shared, clips were recorded. People replayed the moment in their minds, analyzing every step, every expression, every subtle movement of Keanu Reeves. "Did you see how calm he was?" one whispered. "He didn't even need to fight him. The presence alone was enough," said another. For the woman and her husband, the experience had a profound effect. She looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I didn't even notice at first," she said softly. He didn't even need to do anything, and it felt like he protected me just by being there." Her husband nodded. "That's the power of presence," he said. "Sometimes the strongest people don't raise their voice. They simply command respect through who they are." The aggressor eventually rose, still shaken, and took a few unsteady steps away. He avoided eye contact, head lowered, body trembling. He had been humiliated, but more than that, he had been given a lesson that he would never forget. The lesson was simple but profound. Arrogance and cruelty are visible, and they have consequences. Respect cannot be forced. It must be earned, and sometimes, life teaches that lesson in the most unexpected ways. Keanu Reeves, meanwhile, disappeared into the city crowd. He said nothing more. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The lesson had been delivered, the woman protected, and the aggressor humbled. For the thousands who witnessed it, both in person and online, the moment became a story of quiet power, courage, and integrity. The street returned to normal, but the people who had witnessed the confrontation would never forget. They walked away with a renewed sense of humility and a reminder that true strength isn't shown through violence or shouting. It's shown through calmness, presence, and unwavering integrity. And for the aggressor, that lesson would echo in his mind forever, a quiet but inescapable reminder that arrogance is fleeting and respect, real respect, is earned through actions, presence, and character. Some lessons don't need words. Some lessons don't need violence. Some lessons are delivered silently, but they hit harder than any punch ever could. The street was quiet now. The crowd dispersed. And the quiet man, Keanu Reeves, had left behind a story that would be told for years. A story of respect, humility, and the undeniable power of quiet strength. As the crowd began to disperse and the street slowly returned to its usual rhythm, a quiet realization settled over everyone who had witnessed the confrontation. What had seemed like an ordinary afternoon in downtown Los Angeles had transformed into something extraordinary. A lesson in humility, respect, and the power of quiet presence. The woman and her husband walked a few steps away, hand in hand, still processing the surreal moment they had just endured. Her grip on his hand was firm, a mix of relief and gratitude. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't even raise a hand, and yet," she trailed off, unable to fully express the impact of what she had witnessed. Her husband nodded, understanding her thoughts perfectly. "It's not about power or aggression," he said softly. "It's about presence, integrity, and knowing when to act, and when to let actions speak louder than words. What you just experienced wasn't just about protecting you. It was about showing the world that respect is earned, not forced." Meanwhile, the man in the leather jacket, the aggressor, remained on the curb, head bowed, trembling. He had been humiliated, yes, but more importantly, he had learned a lesson he could never unlearn. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of true accountability. Every sneer, every arrogant word, every act of cruelty he had committed in public or private suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the silent, commanding authority of someone who didn't need to prove themselves through anger or violence. He realized something profound. Real strength doesn't come from intimidation, loud voices, or physical dominance. Real strength comes from calmness, self-control, and the courage to stand up for what is right, without needing recognition or reward. It's the kind of strength that doesn't demand attention but commands it naturally. The crowd, still lingering in small clusters, replayed the scene in their minds. Phones were still raised, capturing every second, but it was the energy of the moment that lingered more than the footage. They had all seen a rare demonstration of power, not in the form of force, but in the quiet dignity of a man who embodied courage without aggression. The whispers spread through the crowd, repeating the words like a mantra. He didn't even need to fight him. The presence alone was enough. For the woman and her husband, the lesson went deeper. They understood that true courage isn't always visible. Sometimes it's hidden in the calmness of a look, the measured steps of someone walking toward injustice, or the silent assertion of authority that makes wrongdoers reconsider their actions. They had witnessed a moment that was far more than a celebrity encounter. It was a real-life example of integrity in action. The aggressor, finally rising from the curb, moved slowly through the dispersing crowd. Every step felt heavy. He avoided eye contact, his pride crushed, his mind racing. He had underestimated the wrong person. He had thought arrogance and cruelty would carry him through any situation. Now he understood how fragile such power truly is. Respect cannot be demanded, and any attempt to belittle others only reflects back on oneself. And then there was Keanu Reeves. He had disappeared into the flow of the city as quietly as he had arrived. No dramatic gestures, no parting words, yet his impact remained palpable in the energy of the street. Every person who had witnessed the scene carried a piece of the lesson with them. They had learned, without a single confrontation, that humility and integrity leave a mark far deeper than anger or pride ever could. As the crowd began to thin, conversations bubbled up among strangers who had been brought together by this moment. "I've never seen anything like that in my life," one person said. "The way he didn't even shout, yet the guy was terrified." Another added, "It's crazy. He didn't even need to hit him. He just existed and that was enough." The lesson was clear. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who carry it the strongest. For those watching online who would see the clips later, the message was just as profound. In a world obsessed with dominance, aggression, and bravado, this moment served as a reminder that the strongest people are often those who act with calm authority and integrity. True courage doesn't roar. True respect is earned. True power is silent. The woman turned to her husband once more. "I feel like I've learned something today," she said. "Not just about him, but about people. About how to handle situations. About standing up for myself without losing control." Her husband smiled, nodding in agreement. "Exactly. The right actions at the right time speak louder than words." That's a lesson we all need to remember. As for the aggressor, the lesson was seared into his mind. His arrogance, his cruelty, and his disregard for others had been exposed in the most public way possible. But it wasn't a lesson given through violence or fear. It was given through presence, integrity, and the undeniable authority of someone who didn't need to assert dominance to command respect. And so, the street returned to its rhythm. Life went on. But the memory of that moment, a lesson delivered silently, powerfully, and irrevocably, lingered. It was a story that would be shared, remembered, and retold. A story of humility, respect, and the quiet strength that changes people's lives without raising a voice. If you've watched this story unfold, here's your takeaway. Respect isn't about fear, wealth, or status. It's about actions, presence, and integrity. It's about standing up for others when no one else will. And it's about remembering that one day, the person you underestimate might be the one teaching you the most important lesson of your life. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility and quiet strength are the true marks of power. Share where you're watching from. Every story deserves to be seen, every lesson deserves to be remembered. And remember, real strength doesn't need to shout. It simply exists, and when it does, the world notices.